We signed the divorce papers on Chinese Valentine's Day. While others were getting married, I was ending a 10-year chase. I thought that was the last time I'd see him. But then I threw up in our lab elevator and he pressed the same pressure point on my wrist like he used to, like we hadn't ended everything. And when I found out I was pregnant, I used to imagine the day we'd part ways would be stormy. Rain pouring from a leaden sky. Me in a long coat, standing beneath an umbrella that trembled from the weight of my heartbreak. James Carter standing across from me, wet hair clinging to his forehead as I stared at him with cold detachment and said, "Let's never see each other again." Then I'd walk away, heels clacking against wet pavement, leaving behind a silhouette for him to regret for the rest of his life. But life, as it always does, had other plans. There was no storm. No cinematic gray sky. Only sunshine. And humidity. And the sound of dozens of couples laughing hand in hand as they queued at the Civil Affairs Bureau. Apparently we'd filed for divorce on Chinese Valentine's Day, Qixi. While other people were getting married or registering to be with the love of their life, I was signing the dotted line to officially end a 10-year pursuit. One-sided, painful, exhausting. James stood beside me in his usual white shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows, fingers steady as he held the pen. He didn't even flinch when the official stamped the divorce certificate. I had dressed up that day. Not for him, for myself. A navy blue dress with pearl buttons, hair in soft waves. A little war paint, if you will. If I was going to sign away the last decade of my life, I deserved to look my best while doing it. The clerk glanced at us, puzzled. "You're here for divorce?" I smiled. Yes. They blinked at our neat attire. Maybe they expected fights or tears. But James simply adjusted his collar, nodded at the clerk and waited in silence. When we were handed the papers, I raised mine with a mock flourish and tapped it lightly against his wrist. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You're officially free." He looked down at where I had tapped him. "Tomorrow's a work day. Don't be late for the 9 a.m. clock-in." And with that he turned and walked out into the sun. No pause. No hesitation. No, "Are you okay?" I stared after him. That bastard. Still so composed. "So, James." I clutched the certificate tighter, half tempted to throw it at the back of his head. But what would be the point? Instead, I walked in the opposite direction. It wasn't until much later that I realized how painfully fitting it all was. On the day lovers met across the Milky Way, we stood on the same side of the earth, and still couldn't find a way to stay together. I barely made it to work the next morning. Blame it on the bus that stopped 800 meters away from the research lab, or the fact that I had only 2 hours of sleep after crying into a tub of mango sorbet. But as I sprinted through the entrance and slapped my palm against the biometric scanner, the red light flickered, just barely on time. The nausea hit the second I stepped into the elevator. At first I thought it was just from running. I was panting like a dying dog, clutching my stomach, eyes swimming. But then James stepped in. Of course he did. Same building. Same department. Same elevator. Despite being divorced, nothing had changed. He didn't say anything. Just stood behind me, scrolling through his phone. Then the dry heaving started. "Emily." A soft voice beside me. The new intern, Zoe? She reached out to touch my arm. "Are you okay?" The second her hand brushed me, my stomach turned violently. I dropped to the floor, gagging, bow rising. The elevator doors dinged open and a group of senior researchers, mostly balding, all carrying stacks of paper, stared in horror. "Quick. Help her up. It's not even New Year's yet and she's already falling apart," one of them joked weakly. I wanted to flip him off. I couldn't see clearly. Tears blurred my vision. I felt hot, nauseous, humiliated. Just then a hand gripped my wrist firmly. "Stand up slowly. Don't let the cramping get worse." James Carter. The ex-husband. The emotionless robot. His voice was calm but authoritative. He pressed his thumb against a pressure point on my wrist, and to my absolute disbelief, the nausea dulled. Not completely, but enough to breathe. "Liam, get water." "Zoe, go to my locker. Grab the bread in the red container," he ordered. Why did he still keep bread in his locker? Oh right. Because of me. He used to do this all the time. Every time I had stomach problems, he'd reflexively step in, pressing pressure points, handing me crackers. His grandfather had been a traditional Chinese medicine doctor, and James had absorbed those skills the way he absorbed everything. Perfectly. "You two are so in sync," my mom had once joked. If Emily hiccups, James already knows what kind of tea to boil. Back then I had laughed. Now it felt like a cruel reminder. I sat down on a nearby bench. James didn't leave my side. He crouched in front of me, holding my wrist like it still belonged to him. "Did you eat breakfast?" "Yeah," I muttered. "Made it myself." A long silence followed. We both remembered. Our first wedding anniversary. I had insisted on cooking for him. A blackened fried egg burnt on the outside, raw in the middle. "This egg is interesting," he had said. "A case study in conflicting food states." After that he cooked every single day of our marriage. The interns returned with water and bread. I took a sip and immediately spat it out. Right onto James's shirt. The interns panicked. I'm so sorry," I gasped, pulling away from him. He was still holding my wrist. "This doesn't seem like a stomach problem," Zoe whispered. "Could you be pregnant?" The world froze. I stared at her, speechless. She smiled nervously. "My sister-in-law was like this in the beginning too. Couldn't even smell bread without gagging." Rumors spread faster than fire in our lab. By lunchtime, half the department was buzzing with the news. I sat quietly in the corner of the break room, chewing dry crackers as if they could neutralize embarrassment. A few well-meaning colleagues came by. "Are you really pregnant? Why are you still coming to work? Where's the baby's father? How could he let you come alone?" The worst part, they weren't being mean. They were genuinely concerned. I'd always had a good relationship with them. But standing nearby, James Carter. Silent. Watching. One of the junior researchers frowned. "Professor, don't you think the baby's father is being irresponsible?" The room turned to him. He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes unreadable. Then in that maddeningly slow, precise voice of his he said, "The baby's father just found out too." The room went still. "What does that mean?" someone whispered. He didn't elaborate. Instead he turned to me. "Emily, come outside." We stepped into the hallway. He didn't speak. Neither did I. We didn't need to, not with that question hanging between us. "Are you really?" Before he could finish, HR burst out of the stairwell. "Emily. Wait. Are you resigning because you're pregnant?" James turned to me sharply. His eyes widened. "You've resigned." For the first time I saw it, real emotion cracking through that flawless composure. By the time I finalized the resignation paperwork and returned my badge, the sun had begun to dip low. James was waiting under the big tree outside the institute. I didn't want to walk toward him, but my feet moved anyway. He stepped forward. "Do you have time?" "For what?" "Two things," he said. "First, we need to confirm whether you're actually pregnant. Second, we need to talk about why you're quitting your job." His voice was too calm. Too professional. Like I was just another research paper. I scoffed. "Did you forget we're divorced? My decisions have nothing to do with you anymore." He flinched. Barely. But I saw it. The word ex-husband had finally landed. For once I had won a round. But why did it feel so hollow? I used to think exhaustion came from overwork. Long hours, endless reports, missed meals. But the deepest kind of exhaustion wasn't physical. It was emotional. It was sitting alone on a street curb with a bag of discounted bakery bread in my lap, the sky dimming above me and tears soaking into a loaf of sourdough. It had been the day after James and I signed the divorce papers. The lab had been quiet that day except for the constant buzz of fluorescent lights and the soft hum of a centrifuge. James had buried himself in data, pretending like nothing happened. Like 10 years together had never even existed. On the way home I passed by the bakery near the metro station. A buy one get one tag was slapped over a stack of bread. The smell hit me first. Warm yeast, stale butter, the kind of scent that reminded me of something I couldn't name. I bought it all. Every last discounted roll. Then sat down on the sidewalk, tore into a piece and chewed. Tasted sour. I kept eating anyway. Only when I choked on my third bite did I realize I was crying. Ugly crying. Hunched over on the sidewalk in a navy dress with pearls still pinned to my collarbone, clutching stale bread and wondering, was it worth it? I had studied till 3 a.m. in high school just to get into the same university as James Carter. I had followed him from one lab to another, learning subjects I had no interest in, submitting papers I barely understood, all for the chance to walk beside him. But I had never once asked myself what I wanted. What made me happy? I went home, tossed the bread in the trash, and wrote my resignation letter. The next day I handed it in. 2 days later, my life officially untethered from James Carter, both legally and professionally. And on the third day, my best friend dragged me to a bar. "You did it," she said, looping an arm through mine. "Divorced and unemployed. You're finally free." "I was thinking of going for a walk," I said dryly. She rolled her eyes. "You can walk tomorrow. Tonight we celebrate." The bar wasn't too packed, but loud enough for anonymity. Neon lights flickered above us, making everyone's faces look younger, wilder. I hadn't been in a place like this since college. "Wait, you're not drinking?" she asked, eyeing my untouched cocktail. "I went to the hospital yesterday." Her expression sobered. "Are you?" I nodded slowly. A long pause. Then, well SH'd. She didn't offer congratulations. Didn't ask if it was planned. That's why she was my best friend. She just took a sip of her drink and said, "Okay. No booze. You still owe me a free drink though." She pointed to a sign on the bar wall. "Sing a song. Win a drink." "I'm not in the mood." "You were top 10 in high school choir. And you play guitar. Don't make me beg." I sighed but stood up anyway. I borrowed the bartender's old acoustic guitar, adjusted the strap, and stepped onto the tiny stage tucked in the corner. The lights dimmed slightly. Conversations faded. I didn't even need to introduce myself. My fingers found the chords as if they'd never left. I sang an old ballad, soft, slow, a little cracked from disuse. My voice trembled on the first note, but by the second verse, it had settled. The room was still. People listened. By the end, the crowd erupted. Cheers. Whistles. A few people clapped along. One guy yelled, "Encore." I laughed, for real this time, and handed the guitar back. When I turned around, I froze. James Carter. Leaning against the far wall. White dress shirt. Black slacks. Hair still slightly mussed from the wind. He looked completely out of place. Like a lecturer who'd wandered into a frat party. But there he was. Watching me. I walked straight over, heart pounding. "What the hell are you doing here?" He raised an eyebrow. "That's what I should be asking you." I folded my arms. "It's a bar. Not illegal." "You're working here?" "What?" "You sang for a drink. Is that your job now?" I blinked, stunned by the absurdity. "No, I'm celebrating. You know, resignation, divorce, accidental pregnancy? Pick one." He pulled out his phone and tapped something. A moment later, I felt my phone buzz. $50 transferred from James Carter. I stared. Then another notification. $150 transferred from James Carter. "What are you?" "If you needed money, you should have just told me," he said quietly. "You don't need to take singing gigs in places like this." "James," I hissed. "I'm not. I'll contact the lawyer tomorrow. The East Side house, I'll transfer it to your name. And we can adjust the remaining assets split." He wasn't listening. Just typing, transferring, fixing. And I was standing there with a rising tide of nausea and rage. "Do you think this fixes everything?" I asked. "No," he said without hesitation. "But it helps." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "I don't want your money. You took it." He had a point. I was about to say something cruel, something final, when another wave of dizziness hit me. My knees buckled slightly. I grabbed the back of a chair. James immediately stepped forward. "You okay?" "I'm fine." But I wasn't. And he knew it. He didn't argue. Just held my elbow and led me outside. The cool night air was a balm. I leaned against the side of the building, breathing slowly. James stood beside me, silent. "Why are you even here?" I asked. He pulled out his phone again and showed me the screen. It was a post I had made on social media. A blurry picture of the stage captioned, "Free drink if I sing. Watch me ruin my vocal cords." I had posted it without thinking. "I saw it," he said. "Didn't think you'd actually do it. So you rushed here to stop me from humiliating myself?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me, really looked. "You are really pregnant?" My breath caught. I nodded. A long silence. "What are you planning to do?" I met his gaze. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." I wanted to scream, cry, puff, hug him, punch him. "You're my ex-husband, James. You don't get a say. I'm the father." And I'm the one who has to carry it. His jaw tightened. Legally the child. Isn't even a child yet, I snapped. It's not your decision. He looked like he wanted to argue, but just then my phone rang. The bakery contractor. Excuse me, I said, stepping away. His voice trailed behind me. Emily. I didn't turn back. Not because I hated him, but because I wasn't sure I could face the way he looked at me. As if he finally saw me for the first time, and didn't know what to do with what he saw. I had never run a business in my life. Still, I dove into renovating the bakery like it was my salvation. Morning to night, I was elbow deep in paint samples, floor tile catalogs, and plumbing contracts. My hands were always dusty, my bank account permanently light, but for the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder to check if James Carter approved. The space was small, barely enough for 6 tables and a counter, but I saw potential. Sunlight poured through the front windows. I imagined the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting into the street. I pictured little chalkboard signs hand-lettered by me announcing daily specials. It was mine. My life. My dream. And then the pipes exploded. It happened on a Tuesday. The renovation crew had promised to finish the plumbing by end of day. I arrived around 7 p.m., exhausted but excited, only to find water gushing across the newly laid tile like a miniature tsunami. What the hell? I shouted. A few workers were standing outside, smoking like the bakery wasn't turning into a swimming pool. One shrugged. Pipe cracked. Boss said we'll send someone tomorrow. Tomorrow. I repeated, soaked shoe squelching across the floor. You're leaving this overnight? They shrugged again. My hands curled into fists. My dream, the one I'd finally chosen for myself, was drowning. And the men who broke it didn't even care. I called the site manager. No answer. I called again. Then again. And again. All his numbers went to voicemail. My hands trembled as I dialed one more time. Another number I hadn't called since the bar incident. The phone rang once. Twice. Hello. I don't need this right now. I snapped. You think you can just show up and care when it's convenient? Where were you when everything went wrong, huh? Do you think I need your pity? Let me tell you something, James Carter, I can replace you just like that. Get lost. I hung up, and then I looked at the screen. The call log read, James Carter, incoming call. I had just screamed at him before he even spoke. *T. The crew eventually returned. They patched the pipes and promised to try harder next time. I didn't believe them, but I didn't have the energy to fight. Thankfully, my best friend came with takeout and a mop. We spent the evening bailing water out of my future bakery, laughing bitterly, crying a little, and sharing greasy dumplings on a half-installed countertop. By 11 p.m. I was ready to collapse. My clothes clung to me. My hands were raw. My heart ached. My phone buzzed. James Carter. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the red button, then hit green instead. What do you want? I said, voice low. There was a pause. Then, what are you doing? Feeding stray dogs, I said, too exhausted to come up with a better lie. There was another pause. Then he said flatly, then why don't you have that 6-foot-tall dog next to you say hello? I blinked. And looked up. James was standing right outside the bakery. Phone still to his ear. Dressed as always. Collared shirt, black slacks, calm expression. My new renovation manager, who had been helping me lift a box, caught sight of him and blanched. I'll get going, he said quickly. You're in good hands. Then he bolted. James hung up his phone and stepped inside. What are you doing here? I asked, crossing my arms. I was passing by. Carrying groceries? He looked down at the bag in his hand like it had just appeared there. Too many for one person. Thought I'd share. Convenient. He didn't answer. Just walked into my apartment like he still lived there. Which, to be fair, he once did. He moved to the kitchen and started unpacking. Tomatoes, eggs, ginger, even a fresh baguette. He moved like clockwork. Sleeves rolled up, chopping board out, oil in the pan. Did I ask you to cook? I said, leaning against the doorframe. No. But you haven't eaten. Maybe I'm not hungry. You never eat when you're upset. But your hands are shaking. Damn him. 20 minutes later, 3 dishes and a soup sat steaming on the table. I stared. You made all this in one pan? I'm efficient. Dinner was quiet. I didn't know what to say. In the past I would have filled the silence. Chatter, questions, anything to draw him out. James never initiated conversation, but he always responded. That used to be enough. Now it just felt lonely. I picked at my food. He ate slowly, mechanically. Then I accidentally scooped a few red chili slices into my bowl. He looked up sharply. You're pregnant. Don't eat that. I can eat what I want. He put down his chopsticks. Emily. I'm not a child. No. You're carrying one. His tone wasn't angry. Just firm. And so familiar it hurt. I dropped my chopsticks. James, you don't have to do this. Do what? Play house. Be the good ex-husband. Cook dinner. Say all the right things. I'm not playing. Then what are you doing? He met my eyes. Regardless of whether you decide to keep the baby, I will take responsibility. I laughed bitterly. Again with the responsibility. I couldn't stop staring at the chain tucked beneath his collar. That silver glint, that thin loop of metal I had once worn every day, it had returned like a ghost, uninvited and undeniable. And on it our wedding ring. A smooth platinum band, simple, elegant, and inscribed on the inside with two names, Emily and James, and a single word between them, forever. The word mocked me now. We had been divorced less than a month. I didn't ask about it again. I just sat down and started eating in silence, slowly, like my appetite had come back, but my body didn't quite trust it. Across from me, James did the same. Calm, focused, detached, or so it seemed. Then, without warning, his voice broke the silence. Do you remember the day you first saw that ring? I looked up. What? The one in the store window. The one you put back without a second thought. Of course I remembered. I'd spotted it by chance. A limited edition, rose-cut diamond, subtle curve, minimalist band. The price tag had nearly made my eyeballs pop out of my skull. I dragged him away before he could even blink. Yeah, I said slowly. We were broke. You said it was stupid to waste that much on something shiny. I had. Because I was trying to be practical. And because it hurt too much to want something I knew we couldn't afford. James leaned back in his chair, fingers loosely resting on the edge of his bowl. Do you know what I did after that? You sold your car, I murmured. He blinked. How did you? I figured it out when you insisted on taking the scooter to the real estate office in December. You always hated riding in the cold. He gave a small smile, barely there. I bought that ring because you didn't ask me to, he said softly. You never did. You never asked for anything. I asked you to love me, I said before I could stop myself. He went still. I expected him to refute it. Maybe say of course I did. But he didn't. He just whispered, and I did. My chest tightened. Then why didn't you show it? Because I thought you already knew, he replied, voice hollow. And because I didn't know how. I sat there, stunned. The bravado I'd carefully rebuilt since our divorce suddenly felt thin as paper. I wanted to give you everything, he said. So I dragged you into my world. I convinced you to get your master's, to join the institute, to research things you didn't care about. Because you were selfish. He nodded. Because I was afraid. He said it so plainly that I forgot to breathe. I thought if I let you chase your own path you'd drift away, he continued. So I made sure our paths overlapped. I convinced myself it was love, that I was helping you grow. But really, I was holding on so tightly I didn't see I was dragging you down. My throat burned. You never held me back, Emily, he said. I held you back. I turned away, blinking fast. Then why didn't you stop me sooner? I didn't know how to. I wanted to scream. Or cry. Or laugh. But I didn't do any of those things. I just asked, why now? Why say all this after we've already ended it? James looked down. His hand moved unconsciously to the spot where the ring sat hidden. Because I thought letting you go meant freeing you. But I didn't know it would break me. The room went quiet. It felt like the floor beneath me had shifted. I had spent years wondering if I was crazy. If I'd imagined all the tiny gestures, all the unspoken warmth, the soft glances across textbooks, the way he always brewed my tea with 2 lemon slices instead of 1. Maybe it wasn't imagined. Maybe it had just been buried under 10 layers of logic and cold practicality. James, I whispered, what happened to you? You weren't always this distant. He didn't answer right away. Just got up and walked to the kitchen sink. Then with his back to me he said, my father used to tell me, If you rest, you rot. He thought emotions were a waste of energy. My breath hitched. He'd come home late, drunk sometimes. I had to finish math problems perfectly. If I got one wrong, I got the belt. I still have a scar on my back from a time I spilled soup on the table. He turned around. The first time I ever felt warmth was with you. I didn't know what to say. I was 16, he continued. You passed me a tissue when I sneezed during orientation. You probably don't remember. But I do. I do, I said softly. You smiled at me like I was a person, not a project. I didn't know how to process that. A lump formed in my throat. I studied harder to stay close to you. I followed your routine, memorized your habits. I didn't know it was called love back then. I just knew I felt safe. You never said a word. I didn't have the vocabulary for it, he replied. You talked about dreams, baking, opening a shop. I didn't understand how someone could love something so simple. His voice cracked. I do now. Tears stung my eyes. I used to think you were this perfect, untouchable genius, I whispered. I chased you like a prize. But the truth is, you were just a scared boy pretending to be a man. He nodded. And I was a woman pretending to be okay. That broke the last of the silence. We sat there, two people finally admitting what 10 years had buried. That love doesn't always look like fairy tales. Sometimes it looks like burnt eggs. Like awkward silences. Like a ring hidden under a collar. I don't need you to take responsibility for the baby, I said quietly. I know. I don't need your house or your groceries or your pressure point massages. I know. But I do want honesty. James looked up. So do I. Then be honest with me now. Why are you still here? He didn't hesitate. Because I don't know how to stop loving you. I closed my eyes. God. Of all the things he could have said, that was the one I wasn't ready for. But maybe it was what I had always waited to hear. My mother, true to form, didn't waste time. The moment she realized I was divorced, pregnant, and unemployed, in that order, she flew in like a concerned general ready to wage war on my behalf. She inspected my unfinished bakery, made sounds at the exposed pipes, and then dragged me back to my apartment for what she called a life review. I only pushed you to be with James because I thought he was your safe future, she said, holding my hands. But now I see, you've been exhausted for years. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. He meant well. But I had grown tired of being steered. That didn't stop her from setting me up with a parade of men, introduced under the label of friend, but carrying the heavy air of matchmaking. The fourth guy, Greg, I think his name was the final straw. He picked the cheapest bubble tea place in the city, spent 5 minutes trying to use 3 different apps to pay, then handed me a crumpled dollar and said, "Guess I'm old-fashioned." I paid for us both just to escape the awkwardness. As we walked out, he casually said, "If I'd known you were paying, I would have ordered the most expensive one." Even the teenage cashier rolled her eyes. "You used to work at a research lab?" he asked as we walked. "Too many male colleagues, right? That's not good. Women should be careful around men." "I was more focused on lab results than flings," I said coldly. Greg laughed. "Well, don't study too much. No man likes a woman who's smarter than him." I stopped walking. "Greg, do you own a mirror?" He blinked. "What?" "Or at least a reflective puddle. Anything that might show you what you look like when you say garbage out loud." He stammered something about just being honest, but I was already walking away. My mother didn't press me after that. I didn't expect to see Greg again. But the universe has a cruel sense of humor. It was a rainy afternoon. I had just returned from picking up new red date syrup from the herbal shop next door. The bakery's front lights were glowing softly and I'd finally set up 2 chairs by the window. Then the door slammed open. "You ruined my reputation." Took me a second to recognize him. Greg. Slightly drunk. Rage simmering in his eyes. "You told the others about me, didn't you? That's why no one wants to date me." I blinked. "Greg, what?" "I'm warning you," he growled, stepping closer. "You women are all the same. Always looking down on men like me." I stood firm. "You're making a scene. Leave." But he didn't. He grabbed a stool and slammed it against the ground. Wood splintered. My breath caught. I backed away. That's when someone stepped between us. A voice I knew far too well. "Sir, I've already called the police." James Carter. In a flash, he twisted Greg's wrist behind his back, forcing him down. Greg howled in pain. "Let go." James eased up, only for Greg to twist, swing, and punch him in the temple. I screamed. James collapsed to the floor. The hospital room was quiet. I sat beside the bed watching him sleep. A light bruise bloomed on his cheek, but the doctor said he was fine. No concussion, just light trauma. When his eyes finally opened, they met mine. I leaned closer. "Do you remember who I am?" He stared at me blankly. My heart stopped. Then he smirked. "Why are you asking such a dumb question?" I shoved his shoulder hard. "Don't scare me like that." He winced and rubbed his temple. "Ow. You deserved it. I saved your life. You got yourself punched." He gave a tired chuckle. "Still saved you." Silence settled. I glanced at his collar again. Why are you still wearing the ring?" I asked softly. He looked away. "I already bought it." "That's not an answer." After a long pause, he said, "It's the only thing I bought for you that I chose entirely on my own. You didn't push me. You didn't even ask for it." He turned to me. "I saw how your eyes lit up when you saw it, and how quickly you looked away when you saw the price. I wanted to give it to you because it was the first time I saw you want something for yourself." I swallowed hard. Flashbacks poured in. That tiny jewelry shop on Main Street, Christmas lights glowing outside. The way my heart had raced when I saw that ring. And the way I'd forced myself to let it go. I remembered coming home days later and finding a velvet box on my pillow. James didn't say a word. But I knew. "I sold the car," he'd said days later when I asked how he could afford it. "It was just a car," he added when I looked at him in shock. "There will always be more cars. But not more you." Those had been his exact words. The first and only romantic sentence James Carter had ever said to me. In the hospital room, he shifted slightly and pulled the chain from around his neck. The ring sat in his palm. Tiny. Familiar. Forever. "I couldn't sell it," he said. I touched it gently. "You kept it all this time?" He nodded. Our fingers brushed. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly. "Even when I didn't know how to show it. Even when I hurt you." The tears came without warning. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just silent, aching release. "Me too," I whispered. He reached up and slid the ring back onto my finger. And for the first time since our wedding, it fit perfectly. Hospitals are always colder at night. Even when you're not sick, the air seems too sterile, the silence too loud. I sat next to James on the bench outside his room, a paper cup of lukewarm tea in my hands. Neither of us spoke. He took off his coat and handed it to me without a word. The collar of his hospital gown was askew, and just below his neck, the silver chain still glinted, our wedding ring dangling like a memory refusing to fade. I didn't ask him to put it away. "I used to think you were emotionless," I said quietly, like some kind of genius robot. "Cold but perfect." He exhaled a small laugh. "I thought you were reckless. Always chasing people, dreams, impossible ideas." "Well," I muttered, "we were both right." He tilted his head back and looked at the ceiling. "My father never cried," he said. "Not when his wife died. Not when I begged him to stop yelling. Not when we had nothing to eat but boiled cabbage for a week." I stayed silent, letting him speak at his own pace. "He once told me that survival doesn't allow for weakness. That emotions are liabilities." My heart twisted. "That's horrible." He shrugged. It was all he knew. He rolled up the sleeve of his hospital gown, revealing a jagged scar across his forearm, thick, pale, and unmistakable. "I got this when I was 10, he said. "I snuck out to go fishing with the neighbor's kids. Came home and found him holding a kitchen knife. Said he'd cut off my hands if I ever disobeyed again." My hand reached for his without thinking. He didn't pull away. "I always thought if I worked hard enough, got good enough, he'd stop being angry," James said, voice low. But even when I brought home awards, he barely nodded. He turned to me. "And then I met you." I blinked. "You mean when I pestered you for your calculus notes?" "You gave me a tissue," he corrected, smiling faintly. "During orientation. You said, 'Bless you,' like I wasn't invisible. You remember that?" It was the first time anyone looked at me like I mattered. I felt my throat tighten. "I followed you into university," he admitted. "Then into research. I told myself it was coincidence, but it wasn't. You were the only warmth I'd ever known. James. I didn't marry you because I got you pregnant, he said. I married you because I was afraid if I didn't, I'd lose my only home. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was being responsible. But I didn't realize I was smothering you, he continued. Convincing you to follow my path. Stealing yours in the process. It wasn't just you, I whispered. I never stopped running. I chased you through school, through work, through life. My voice cracked. I was terrified of being left behind. He turned fully toward me. You were never behind. I just didn't know how to walk beside you. We sat in silence again. Then I muttered, my mom used to say I was ambitious. That I lost interest in guys once I beat them. James blinked. She said that about me? She thought I pursued you just to prove something. But it wasn't about winning. What was it about? I looked him square in the eye. It was about you. He stared at me, something raw and vulnerable flickering in his gaze. I should kiss you, I added suddenly, just to make you suffer for how much you put me through. He laughed. A real one, the kind that crinkled his eyes and made his shoulders shake. You're lucky, I said, pretending to sigh. You've still got the kind of face that's hard to stay mad at. He leaned in slightly, teasing. What if I didn't? What if one day I'm not good looking anymore? I looked at him seriously. I'd still love you. He froze. Why? Because you're James Carter, I said simply. Because even when you didn't know how to love, you tried. Silence fell again. A warm kind. I want to be better, he said finally. For you. For the baby. For myself. You don't owe me that. I don't. But I want to. He reached up and unclasped the chain around his neck. The ring dropped into his palm. I don't want to wear this for memory's sake, he said. I want to wear it because I still mean it. I looked at him, this man who had once been a mystery to me even in marriage. Now he was slowly unfolding. What are you asking? I whispered. His fingers brushed mine. I'm asking if you'll let me love you properly this time. The silence that followed James's question wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with something heavier. Hope. Fear. The ache of two people who had spent too long trying to be everything for each other except honest. He reached for my hand. Slowly, deliberately, he took the ring from the chain and slid it onto my finger. It fit like it never left. Not tight. Not loose. Just right. I looked down at it, then at him. I don't want to wear it for memory's sake, he repeated. I want to wear it for our future. I didn't say anything at first. But I didn't take it off either. Later that evening, in the elevator, James stood beside me with his hands in his pockets. The moment felt suspended, like something unsaid hung between us. There's something I haven't told you, he finally said. I turned my head. My father, he said quietly. He's been in and out of the hospital. Stage 4. I blinked. Cancer. He nodded. He doesn't have much time left. I didn't ask why he hadn't told me earlier. Part of me already knew. Their relationship had been strained, a constant tug-of-war between duty and suffocation. But he was still James's father. Do you want me to visit him? He glanced sideways. Only if you want to. 2 days later, we stood outside the hospital room, staring through a small glass panel. Inside, his father lay motionless, frail under thin blankets. His once sharp voice was replaced by the sound of a wheezing monitor. Tubes ran across his body like tangled vines. He had hated me. He had blamed me. Said I stole James's future. But in that moment he was just a dying man. James's hand brushed mine. I know it's hard. It's okay, I said. He didn't go inside. Neither did I. But we stood there for a long time. 3 months passed in quiet waves. James's father deteriorated rapidly. We didn't speak much about it. He'd call occasionally, sometimes just to sit in silence on the phone with me while he waited for test results. Then one morning my phone rang. He's gone, James said softly. I offered to come immediately, but he declined. The funeral's small. It's what he wanted. True to his father's stoic nature, the ceremony was sparse. Just a few old friends, colleagues, and James, standing by the casket in a black suit that hung looser on his frame than I remembered. He didn't cry. Not even once. But when we stepped away from the cemetery, he turned to me. I only have you now. His fingers grazed the curve of my growing belly. No, I whispered. It's all of us now. My bakery opened 2 weeks later. The scent of bread, warm, yeasty, comforting, filled the tiny shop each morning before sunrise. I had flour in my hair and sugar on my sleeves, but I had never felt more fulfilled. Every morning I'd unlock the door with a new sense of purpose. My dream, long buried under equations and lab coats, was finally rising like dough after a perfect proof. The day of the grand opening, my best friend handed me a bouquet of peonies and cried harder than I did. The neighboring shop owner dropped off nourishing soup and claimed it was a business welcome, but I later found the delivery slip tucked in the corner. Prepaid by James Carter, 90 days in advance. That man was impossible. James began visiting every morning under the same excuse. I was just passing by. Which made no sense since his lab was 40 minutes in the opposite direction. Sometimes he brought a thermos. Sometimes a new tea blend he wanted me to try. Once he came in, sat at the corner window seat and just read a book. Didn't even speak. He never pushed. Never asked for anything. But he was always there. One evening as I was wiping down the counter, I glanced at him. He was still sitting at the window, laptop open, typing away. "You're not going home?" I asked. He looked up. "I am home." I paused. And didn't argue. We fell into a rhythm neither of us dared to define. He helped me carry heavy flour bags when shipments came. I left a mug of jasmine tea at his table every morning, no words needed. He fixed a leaky faucet one Saturday without asking. I started packing him an extra bread roll with his coffee. It was like breathing again, easy, unconscious. But different this time. He wasn't the center of my world anymore. I was. And he didn't seem to mind. One night I collapsed onto the couch, feet swollen, lower back aching. Pregnancy had made me feel like a hot air balloon with a pastry addiction. James knelt in front of me without a word, massaging my ankles gently. "You don't have to do this," I muttered, though I didn't mean it. "I want to. You spoil me. Let me keep spoiling you." I looked down at him, at the man who once couldn't even express his emotions, now gently easing the soreness from my feet. He glanced up. "Emily," he said softly. "Yeah. Let's get married again." I stiffened. "Why?" "Because I never stopped loving you." My throat tightened. "Don't marry me just because of the baby." "I'm not." He took my hand. "I'm marrying you because I can't imagine a life without you." I stared at him, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. And slowly I nodded. This time there was no lavish ceremony. Just a quiet city hall afternoon. A tiny gold band. My best friend snapping photos with her phone and crying again, of course. We walked out hand in hand, the late autumn breeze swirling around us. "Any regrets?" he asked. "Not a single one," I replied, squeezing his hand. He smiled. "Me neither." A few months later, in the quietest hour of the morning, our child was born. Tiny, wrinkled, red-faced and screaming, with James's dark eyes and my stubborn jawline. He held the baby in his arms like he used to hold fragile glassware in the lab. Careful, reverent, afraid to breathe too hard. "Welcome to the world," he whispered. I watched him, heart full. After all the detours and silence, we had finally come home. Together. And this time we weren't letting go. The baby woke at 5:37 a.m. I groaned into my pillow, already calculating how many minutes I could delay before stumbling to the crib. Before I could push the blanket back, I heard footsteps. James. Half asleep, he scooped our daughter into his arms with the practiced ease of a man who had memorized every soft whimper and urgent cry. "You sleep," he said over his shoulder. "I've got her." I drifted back to sleep to the sound of him humming softly, off-key of course, and our daughter's sleepy coos. Our mornings were slow now. Not lazy, no, not with a baby in a bakery, but grounded. James brewed coffee with the same focus he once applied to research data, measuring grinds like milligrams, timing everything down to the second. I kneaded dough near the window, letting sunlight pour in as I worked, apron dusted in flour, hair in a messy knot, baby monitor clipped to my shirt. He fed her between oven timers. I folded croissant dough during lullabies. We had become a team in a way we never managed to be the first time around. Not because we tried harder, but because this time we chose to try together. He no longer belonged to a world of silent calculations and sterile white rooms. He belonged here, with me, with us. In the scent of butter and cinnamon. In the morning laughter. In the half-finished conversations we carried throughout the day like warm bread in our palms. The bakery was modest but thriving. Word had spread quickly about the pastries, sure, but mostly about the atmosphere. People came in for the almond tarts and sourdough, but they stayed for the baby squeals in the background, for the daily specials named after inside jokes, for the way James greeted each customer like an old friend. Even though he was still a little awkward, still more scientist than salesman. "Try the raspberry brioche," he'd say, pushing up his glasses. "She finally perfected it." He always said she, never we. Because this had always been my dream and he never tried to claim it. Instead he made space for it to grow. My mother visited again. But this time she didn't mention blind dates or suitable men or, "How's your ex?" Though she obviously knew we had remarried. The ring was back on my finger and her granddaughter had James's stubborn eyes. Instead she showed up with a pot of ginseng soup and a pair of handmade baby mittens. "I didn't bring your dad," she said. "He'd just argue about oven temperature." I laughed. We sat outside the shop watching the late afternoon bustle. She sipped tea, squinting at the chalkboard menu. "You did it," she said finally. "I did. And you're happy?" "I'm not surviving anymore, Mom," I said quietly. "I'm living." She nodded, then reached out and squeezed my hand. "I always thought you'd marry a doctor. A lawyer maybe," she teased. "Not a man who learned pressure points from his grandfather." I grinned. "You did say I had a thing for complicated men." She raised an eyebrow. "Just don't let this one go again." "I don't think I could if I tried." Evenings were our favorite. Once the baby was down, once the chairs were stacked and the register closed, we'd sit outside the bakery, side by side, watching the street lamps flicker on. Sometimes we talked about nothing. Sometimes we shared our old regrets like they were old friends, familiar, no longer painful. "I never thought you'd stop chasing me," James said one evening, sipping his tea. I tilted my head. "I never thought you'd turn around." He smiled. "You finally stopped running." I looked at him, at the man who once lived in my shadow, or maybe I in his. At the man I had tried so hard to reach, only to realize we'd been walking in circles around each other for years. I squeezed his hand. "That's because I finally arrived." We didn't take photos of everything. Life wasn't always Instagram perfect. Sometimes the baby threw up on James's shirt right before a customer walked in. Sometimes we forgot to reorder flour and had to improvise. Sometimes I cried at night from the sheer weight of joy and exhaustion tangled together. But every morning when the sun slanted just right across the bakery window, I looked around and saw the life I had always wanted, not one I fought for, not one I chased down like a medal, but one I built with love, brick by brick, loaf by loaf. James brought me tea just as I pulled the first batch of bread from the oven. Our daughter giggled from her bassinet beside the counter. And I thought, this is it. This is home. And this time I'm not leaving. The end.